where to begin? Well, I could start with a jaw-dropping example. I could, for instance, tell you that teachers in Surrey instructed 9-year-olds to masturbate as part of their weekly homework. Or I could tell you that a primary school in Edinburgh held a wear a skirt to school day in which all male pupils and staff were encouraged to take part. How about the teaching resource that champions anal sex to 12-year-olds? I could tell you about that. They're all examples of what passes for pedagogical practice in schools. And it's all recent stuff. I could give you chapter and verse all day long. And no doubt you could return the favour to me. You'll remember, I'm sure, the Year 9 pupil in East Sussex who identified as a cat. You'll also remember that when classmates questioned this worrying behaviour, they were vilified by the teacher supposedly responsible for their welfare. There are many more similar stories of furry identification involving an array of animals from dogs to horses. On and on it goes. Moons, dinosaurs, you name it. Just this week, a school in Scotland allowed a child to identify as a wolf. I'm not even kidding. Okay, that stuff grabs your attention, and I did start with it. But the proper place to start is not so much with the examples themselves as the secrecy in which they are shrouded. That conspiracy of silence is what I want to talk about today. Gender ideology is smuggled into our schools under the plain wrapper of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Most parents have no idea what's going on. Others are blind to the reality. Some find out the hard way. Imagine the shock of discovering that your son goes by a girl's name at school, or that teachers refer to your daughter as he, him. What's happened to our once revered education system? How have we arrived at a situation in which benchmarks of excellence are measured in terms of political indoctrination, sexual obsession, and cultish behaviour? Those are the questions, I think. But before we get to the nitty-gritty and what we can do about it, let's think about the broader context. And there are one or two positive things happening, it has to be said. On April the 10th of this year, the Cass report eviscerated NHS England's gender identity services for children and young people. In July, Health Secretary Wes Streeting called to make the ban on puberty blockers permanent. All good stuff, as far as it goes. But what of schools? A document called Keeping Children Safe in Education provides statutory guidance on safeguarding. On September the 2nd, the new government published the 2024 version. In it, again, there are some positive things. It's been stripped of the Stonewall influence, for example, which means, in theory, that safeguarding can now be taken seriously. In theory. Because here's the thing, the relevant section, page 55, the trans ideology bit, contains a note saying it's under review. That doesn't bode well. I would say to you that we're headed for more of the same. More gender activism in schools, much more rigid adherence to the social justice model, more cats, more wolves, more pronouns. Remember, our government is brimful of identitarian enthusiasts. Our institutions are colonised by gender fanatics. And nowhere is that more so than in education. Higher, further, secondary, and, God help us, primary. The foot soldiers on the front line in schools, colleges and universities will fight to the conceptual death. They'll attack anyone who questions their precious trans ideology. Take it from the cancellation kid here. I know. I've been a heretic in the education system for the last 25 years. So there will be more, much more, of the secrecy that has been devastating children's lives. The pernicious influence of this ideology in classrooms, schoolyards and toilets has long been obvious to gender-critical men and women. Up until very recently, the details were somewhat sketchy, which meant apologists could get away with talk of moral panics, isolated incidences, transphobic parents, far-right agendas, and so on. Who could push back with any real force? Who could say, without fear of contradiction, that schools up and down the country are implicated in a form of abusive practice that can only be described as systemic? Sure, there were studies that dealt with genderism and young people, some of them very good, but there remained something of a gap when it came to schools. Then last year, Policy Exchange think tank published Asleep at the Wheel, an examination of gender and safeguarding in schools. This report, by one Lottie Moore, illustrates how safeguarding principles have gone to the wall. I'm quoting, yeah? We have uncovered numerous cases of schools acting in complete disregard of standard safeguarding procedures, including by not informing parents without good reason in major life decisions by their child, promising confidentiality to a child about certain matters, or allowing children to make significant, potentially irreversible medical decisions without involving either parents or relevant professionals. When she says numerous cases, she means numerous cases. The stats read like a Sunday newspaper expose, not Sunday Times, more news of the world. 28% of secondary schools, only 28% of secondary schools, only reliably inform parents as soon as a child discloses feelings of gender distress. 28%. 69% of secondary schools require that other children affirm a distressed child's new gender identity. Equally shocking is the copy beneath the headlines. Schools will often tell a child that he or she may be born in the wrong body, that there are 72 other genders, that cis heteronormativity is an oppressive Western construct. It's funny just reading those things and seeing people's faces. I do quite a lot of speaking on this kind of thing, and it's always the same. People really, really dislike that, and you can understand why. Because the sexualization of children thrives on secrets and conspiracy. Often it relies on unity against a common foe. It's useful, therefore, to cast a concerned parent as a villain of the piece. It's also the easiest thing in the world to do. After all, someone motivated by love will always be prepared to make themselves unpopular by doing the right thing. It's divide and conquer. It's the oldest trick in the book. And yet somehow, despite progress, pride flags galore, most people are only just waking up to the fact that they've fallen for it once again. The whole cultish nightmare went into overdrive in September 2020, when the Department of Education made relationships, sex and health education compulsory in primary schools. At the same time, it made relationships and sex education mandatory in secondary schools. We know this. Pupils were to receive teaching on lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender relationships during their school years. Okay, but calling it education in any meaningful way is stretching it a bit. What we have in schools is a bizarre set of pedagogical guidelines. They pay lip service to fundamental British values on the one hand, while positioning identity politics at the core of social understanding on the other. It's a hell of a thing. It doesn't work. And there's something else as well, and that's the scale of the delivery. It's huge. absolutely huge and unmanageable. And this is where it gets interesting. In order to cope, schools routinely look to external providers for help. And the result is a rather terrifying free-for-all of collaboration and interpretation in which sleight of hand is the essential element. Academics, activist teachers and charities are populating the curriculum with all manner of ideological and sexualising material. So says Claire Page, campaigner for transparency in schools. This stuff takes in everything from the introduction of gender ideology and queer theory to the normalisation of BDSM and polyamory. Now, I don't know about you, and I've been around a bit, I'm 53, but I'd never actually come across the word polyamory until I was about 48. I don't really know why 13-year-olds need to know about it, but there you go. Parents are told that their child will learn consent from an inclusive perspective. What that means in reality is that they will be taught to other the mainstream and fetishise the extremes. Children are routinely told that heteronormativity is wrong and that virginity is a myth. None of this is the understatement of the whole day, okay? None of this is going to change with the Labour government. Schools are not only selling children short, they are failing them in a spectacular fashion. How can they do anything else amid the chaos that is secretive advocacy? Hidden dangers can just lurk anywhere. Take, for example, the extremely popular Couth app, which schools routinely recommend to pupils. This free, safe and anonymous space for online support and counselling is, according to journalist Mary Harrington, riddled with highly politicised trans activist assumptions. Like similar platforms, Couth leaves a user base of unhappy adolescent girls to fend for themselves, to support one another in affirming and intensifying their shared gender confusion. But that's not the worst of it. Pretty much anyone can sign up, child or adult. They can swap details and then go off into other servers to chat. The potential for abuse is terrifying, it's safeguarding hell. There are around, 200 peddlers of genderist snake oil in and around schools. Many of them are charitable organisations. Now, every now and again, one or two of them gets shut down. That happened this year to the notorious Educate and Celebrate charity. But countless others remain. Sex Education Forum, Proud Trust, Outsiders, Coram Life Education, Brook, and many, many more. Each has a direct line to an impressionable youngster. As freewheeling allies and proxy parents, these external agencies occupy a liminal space, what I call a liminal space, which is, by its very nature, a gateway into another frighteningly pornographic world. There are so many examples. One provider, School of Sex Education, included a link to sex toys and porn on its website. Let's take one more. Gendered intelligence. This has links to Trans Bear All, an organisation that has hosted a naked space for young women who identify as trans. It runs gender identity workshops for children as young as 7. Gendered Intelligence has instructed teachers to withhold information from parents regarding children's gender identity. One representative has also been involved with a non-restricted art exhibition which included explicit sexual content, a close-up of an erect penis. And the money for all this, you might well ask. You won't be surprised when I tell you that Gendered Intelligence received nearly £100,000 from Sadiq Khan. I'll let you just digest that. Okay. Right. Once it takes hold, gender advocacy spreads with alarming rapidity. It's like all identitarian stuff. And nowhere are the effects of this contagion more visible than in higher education. Universities are at the mercy of the rainbow mob. After the hounding of Professor Kathleen Stock, I should say, illustrates just how monstrously unbelievers can be punished. Leading gender-critical women, Baroness Claire Fox and Judy Bindel, to name but two, have been abused on campuses and no platformed. With academic freedom looking ever more like a quaint quirk of past centuries, it's hard to see how schools will buck the trend. After all, they take their ideas from the university sector. Their pedagogical ethos is a product of its teacher training networks. One thing is clear: nothing by meaningful opposition can coexist with identity politics. It is, and always has been, the cuckoo in the education nest. The problem is, we knew this back in 2015, yet we turned a blind eye, even when children started to bring sinister ideas home from school. Now, their distress is evident for everybody to see every day of the week. I've written specifically about this distress quite a bit, and I've done some research. Here's what one interviewee told me about her 6-year-old granddaughter. I'm quoting, yeah? Recently, she's been asking questions about gender identity, framed as whether she will wake up next day as a boy or whether her toy rabbit will change into a boy. Sorry, I'll read that again because it's quite important and I've just messed it up. Recently, she's been asking questions about gender identity, framed as whether she will wake up next day as a boy or whether, if her toy rabbit changes into a boy, she will be able to change it back. That's pretty hard-hitting stuff, isn't it? A 6-year-old having to worry about those things. It's a disturbing demonstration of impact. We always talk in higher education about impact. There's some impact for you. I suppose the question is, can 6-year-olds look forward to much of the same kind of content in the future? Oh yes, very much so. The Department for Education's guidance on LGBT material is clear. Schools should ensure that this content is fully integrated into their programmes of study rather than delivered as a standalone unit or lesson. In other words, they should frame a whole school approach. This means that activist teachers and external agencies can run riot through history, English, and any other subject you care to mention. Unrelated subject areas provide then a perfect haven for controversial material. And of course the parents are none the wiser because schools are under no obligation to consult them. Gender indoctrination, enjoying access all areas. It's important not to overstate the case, but there are pleasing signs of pushback. And some of that opposition comes from children at the sharp end. The Catgate fiasco exposed not only the stupidity of this ideology to the general public, but also its fragility, and I think that's really important. There have been one or two other similar recordings. In each one, the children are the adults in the room. Older gender-critical girls offer still more hope for the future through a combination of intelligent blogging and social media commentary. Particularly effective on this front is Twitter ex-user Brandub4. Her poem, I'm Not a Dress, is an expression of ferocious intelligence and sheer determination. Beyond the school gate, a handful of angry mums make a gloriously ragged stand against ideologues and groomers. Abetted by a few belligerent LGB activists, they convene effectively in online lobby spaces such as Transgender Trend. I have to mention this. Platforms like New Culture Forum do their bit, and Family Education Trust is pretty good as well. Importantly, the Christian Institute has just written an open letter to the Education Secretary urging her to protect children from trans ideology in schools. Signatories include 100 teachers, head teachers, school governors, and other education professionals. Good. We need to do more of it. We must shout loudly. We must get organised. We must take the case for meaningful opt-out of PHSE. We must lobby to scrap it altogether. Parents must be able to publicly discuss their concerns about controversial teaching. That's the only real way we can safeguard children and ban social transitioning of minors. Let's work to restore the correct balance between the principal role of the parent and the supplementary role of the state in educating children on matters of profound cultural and personal importance. Let's call for an amendment to the Education Act so we can make this happen. All the activists I've spoken to, and I've spoken to quite a few, kind of say the same thing, and it's this: all resources in schools should be published, citable and open to public and regulatory scrutiny. If that were the case, things would change tomorrow. There would be no more LGBTQI+ indoctrination, no more militant teachers, no more policy capture by trans radical activists coming into schools, no more abuse. We stand on the threshold of a new era, and in some ways it's difficult to know what will happen, but it's not that difficult. We do know that the government is dominated by gender cultists, and we know that half of them are daft. Remember, David Lammy thinks he can grow a cervix. He can't. I've tried, my testicles got in the way. Schools must stop projecting adult fantasies onto pupils. Transness in childhood, a supposedly natural condition, serves a main purpose of legitimising transness in adults, which begs the question, when are we going to stop making use of children in this way? It's time to shine a light of truth in the grubbiest corners of this secret fantasy world, in which the sexualisation of children continues apace. We must put children first again. By cherishing them for who they are, we can respect their right to childhood. There are confused and dysphoric children, children who do and do not conform to various norms, and children on the autistic spectrum. A percentage of boys and girls will grow up to be gay, lesbian, bisexual, cross-dressers, whatever, fine. Many youngsters want to belong. Many more want to stand out. All of them, to greater or lesser degrees, want to be special. Who doesn't? Shockingly, pupils are prey to predatory paedophiles and indoctrinating ideologues at school. Our main aim must be to put a stop to this scandal. Kids can be lonely, rebellious, shy, miserable, happy, none of the above. With love, boundaries and transparency, we can help them thrive. No child is born in the wrong body. Nobody is born in the wrong body. No child is naturally transgender. Thank you.